Welcome to this Fane online event. I'm Lucy Foley, and I have the huge honour today of interviewing the brilliant, legendary Patricia Cornwell. Um, Honestly, it has been such a joy and a pleasure kind of getting to know you, Patricia, via my research. You are such an interesting person and such an interesting writer, and I have so many questions. I could probably talk to you all day, so it's just going to be a struggle to kind of keep them to the time allotted. I thought for our viewers, I'm sure for most of you, Patricia doesn't actually need much of an introduction, but I'll start, if you don't mind, with your very impressive bio, and then we'll go from there. In 1990, Patricia Cornwell sold her first novel, Postmortem, while working at the office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Richmond, Virginia. An auspicious debut, it went on to win the Edgar, Creasy, Anthony, and McCavity Awards, as well as the French Prix du Roman d'Aventure. My French is struggling there. The first book ever to claim all these distinctions in a single year. Growing into an international phenomenon, the Scarpetta series has since won multiple awards, including the Gold Dagger Award and the RBA Thriller Award. Today, Cornwell's novels and iconic characters are known around the world. Beyond the Scarpetta series, Cornwell has written a definitive non-fiction account of Jack the Ripper's identity, cookbooks, a children's book, a biography of Ruth Graham, and 3 other fictional series based on the characters Win Garano, Andy Brazil, and Captain Callie Chase. Identity Unknown, I feel like I should hold it up here, my beautiful copy. Identity Unknown is the latest book in the Scarpetta series, out now in both the US and the UK. And really excitingly, Scarpetta will soon be coming to a TV screen near you with an Amazon Prime series starring Nicole Kidman and Jamie Lee Curtis, which has just been announced. Congratulations on that. So exciting.
Thank you. I mean, it's been a very long time coming. It's been 34 years since the first Scarpetta was published. So this is, I'm thrilled, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I mean, what names to kind of headline it, right? That is just fantastic.
It is, and they're picking, they're still casting. They've just recently cast Marino is going to be Bobby Cannavale.
Wow.
We have, it's just one star after another that's being drawn to this, and I'm just amazed at the talent. And so it's a big production. They're already in Nashville getting ready to start filming. They start next month, but they've already got boots on the ground because it's being, like I said, it's being filmed in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I'm sure when I told Jamie, because she's a friend, I've known her for 10 years, Jamie Lee Curtis. And
Cool.
I told her recently, I said, I'm probably, when I get to the location and see all the trucks and everything, I'll probably just turn into a puddle on the sidewalk. I'll be so overwhelmed. I'll be like the witch in the Wizard of Oz. I'm melting.
Oh, very topical, actually. We've got some Oz theme stuff in this book, haven't we? But isn't that amazing? Because you've had this incredible, stellar career. You've done so much. You've been on broadcast TV, and yet you feel you will still be kind of awed by this series.
I know I'm going to be awed because my characters have never been flesh and blood. I've had a few little things made from some of the other series, the things that I've written, but I've never had anything with Scarpetta that's worked. Every single production effort failed, going all the way. The very first option was 1989. You weren't even born yet. So, and so, you were just a thought floating
That's
around.
the Zoom filter.
But so it's been so disheartening. And then finally, when you had these procedural shows like CSI that became such a big thing, then the marketplace in Hollywood became not as interested in the Scarpetta series. So it's been through a lot of ups and downs and attempts where you have an option that gets renewed until they've been sitting on it 8 or 9 years and nothing's happened. So then Jamie Lee Curtis decided she was going to produce it, and she's what's made it happen.
Yeah,
it's been really amazing.
And you just know you're in such great hands now, I guess.
Well, it's just I'm I'm excited in a way that I didn't know I would feel, which is, most people are, well, what if it's not exactly what you wrote? And that's what you hear. Well, what if it's not exactly like this or that? But my feeling about it is, within reason anyway, I wouldn't want somebody turning this into something I don't recognize, but I'm interested to see the translation of it
Sure.
because it's a different form of storytelling than what you and I do when we're sitting at our keyboards. But I'll be watching something almost as if it's new to me.
Sure. Sure.
And to have those real people playing these characters that I ostensibly made up. I say ostensibly because I'm not sure who invented who, but uh, I think it's going to be a huge honor and a treat.
Absolutely, that's so exciting. I agree. I think something a really successful adaptation, shares a kind of soul with the work on the page, but it actually needs to have a kind of life of its own on the screen. It needs to do something different. So thrilled for you, and can't wait to watch it myself. So shall we start on Identity Unknown? Would you like to give us a quick précis of the book?
Well, in Identity Unknown, Scarpetta is going about her business in the morgue on a very busy morning, and she's working on a really awful child abuse homicide case, and which you will find out later is not incidental to everything else that's going on, by the way. And she gets a phone call from Lucy. Lucy's in this what's called the Doomsday Bird, this huge helicopter that she flies basically for Homeland Security, the Secret Service, and she's on her way to pick up Scarpetta in Northern Virginia. Scarpetta doesn't know about this yet, but there's been a very strange death. And so let me start by saying I always begin a book with what fills me full of wonder, what makes
Mm.
me curious enough that I'm going to spend a whole year every single day doing this. And so I've been becoming increasingly intrigued by all these reports of what we call UAPs these days, the unidentified anomalous phenomenon, or better known as UFOs, and the whole notion of, is there intelligent life beyond humans? Of course, these days I'm wondering if there's intelligent life among humans at all, much less beyond us.
Right.
But I've been in a lot of scientific environments where I hear stories of people who've had experiences, or they're talking about some strange death in a weird something they saw in a hangar out in the desert that they can't talk about with anybody, that wasn't normal. A death investigator told me about one situation. And I've had some of my own experiences with things that made me wonder about life beyond. And so I said, well, what would happen if Scarpetta had a death where there are all the hallmarks that this person was maybe thrown out of a UFO? And so it opens with she's being airlifted to a scene hundreds of miles away in the mountains of Western Virginia, where a body appears to have been dropped out of what clearly is a UAP, because that something was picked up on radar and by other sensors in this area that they don't know what it was. It does not fit any definition. And meanwhile, there's a body, and it's in an old Wizard of Oz theme park where this thing has been dropped near the witch's castle, which is all kind of falling apart. It's a very creepy scene. The person is nude. You can tell he's been subjected to it seems, some kind of radiation. His skin is all red, and he's got a crop circle of blossoms petals around him that whatever dropped him caused to be stripped from the trees, and in this circle. So Scarpetta's got to go deal with this, and she's got to deal with the government dealing with this because they don't really know what happened here. And to make things worse for her, this person who's been killed is somebody she had a romantic relationship with in the very early days of her career. It's an astrophysicist, a famous one, who was in that area doing research, which makes this all the weirder. So that's how this opens. And it's a lot of fun because she has to do the autopsy in a top secret government facility that we don't know, aren't supposed to know exists, where clearly something strange goes on in there because the body drawers in this mortuary aren't the right size for normal humans. And there's electronic locks and strange numbering on them. And it's on a Langley Air Force Base. And so it's all kind of going from there, but it's rooted in science. I'm not making up something, but it was, but that's the gist of it. And of course, there's all kinds of adventures for people, the various places she's got to go that are all connected with this.
I mean, you take us to so many interesting places, as with all your books. There were so many things that I sort of wrote down, kind of must Google later, need to know more about this. Just the fact that UFOs are no longer called UFOs, did not know that. Uh, so Bigfoot in your last book, obviously aliens we've got here potentially, but also kind of technology, unseen technology, the workings of that DNA. What do you think it is that kind of draws you to the unseen and the unexplained?
I get curious. I mean, for the last book, I started seeing all these stories about alleged Bigfoot sightings, and I've been hearing about Bigfoot since I was probably in high school because I grew up, for the most part, in Western North Carolina in the mountains, a very rural area. And
Mm,
I thought, okay, what is all this hoopla about Bigfoot, and how do we know he really doesn't exist? Because that's my first question is, what if something does exist? I mean, why don't we look at it that way first and then maybe
mm,
decide it doesn't exist? And so I started looking into it. And a lot of people don't know that the reason we think of Bigfoot is because there are fossils that were found in China that indicate there was a creature like this once that could be as up to 10 feet tall. It's called a Gigantopithecus, which means giant ape, basically. And so the thought was it perished in the Ice Age, and it couldn't possibly be in North America. Well, it could be in North America because during the Ice Age, the oceans lowered and there were land bridges
mm,
between the continents, and all kinds of things migrated into from one place to the other. And these big apes from China were two-legged. I mean, they could walk upright, so they could have crossed over with the early humans. So I just thought, okay, we'll have a scene, something where you can look at it as Bigfoot makes a cameo appearance, kind of. So I played with that subject in this new book, the what if. I mean, I've read stories about people that claim they were abducted. I've read stories about alleged bodies that were dropped out of something, whatever, whatever. But I just thought I'm going to look into this from as much of a scientific perspective. I went to the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia and talked to the astronomers there. I've talked to many scientists who are absolutely convinced that there is intelligent life beyond us, and
mm,
some of these objects we're seeing in the sky, that whereas a lot of them probably do have an explanation, because there's a lot of very weird drones flying around that people don't know about, very
mm.
weird drones that if you saw you would swear is a UFO, because some of them are like orb shaped, for example. There's even some that look like birds, but but there are other things that defy definition, that move in ways that we cannot explain with our technologies, even very futuristic technologies, because they seem to defy almost the laws of gravity, and would create G forces that are unthinkable for our vehicles and our people. So so I thought I'd play with that. I mean, just like I'll tell you about Bigfoot. Bigfoot didn't do anything bad. I'm not going to blame Bigfoot for something he didn't do. So he's okay. Don't worry about Bigfoot. And in terms of non-human intelligence, I'm not worried about them either. It's us I'm worried about. We do the bad stuff,
Yeah,
humans.
absolutely. It's so interesting. And it almost gave me the feeling of that kind of childlike excitement and wonder. You know, obviously there's some very dark stuff going on, but it's that kind of what if feeling that you get when you're sort of reading kind of adventure books as a child. Does that make sense? It's sort of it kind of really made me use my sort of imagination and sense of wonder, and yeah, it's just such a great read. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and that's the nicest thing you can say, because if I can cause one's childlike imagination to fire off, that's a gift. I've given them a gift. And if I can write something that fires off my childlike imagination, that gives me a gift, because you're so amazingly young that you may not understand this yet. But as the years go by and you constantly being creative, to have that sense of wonder is a less common commodity. And so you constantly have to figure out, how do I get it back? How do I get my
Mm,
mojo,
mm,
because that's what we want. We want to suspend disbelief and to be taken on a magic carpet ride. And that's one of the reasons I very deliberately chose to open this in an abandoned Oz theme park. And that came from seeing a photograph on Twitter of such a place where you saw the dead leaves on the old yellow brick road in the overgrown forest in the shadows. And I thought, ooh, that's so creepy. I got to use that. And it's very creepy when Scarpetta's going past the ruins of the old Tin Man. And she used to take Lucy there when Lucy was a child.
Yeah.
It's not too far from where they used to be. And she remembers, and the witch's castle, she remembers hearing the voices coming through the speakers and the music, papa, all that stuff. And so that was fun for me.
That
And that's what I try to do.
that scene is just incredible. I mean, talk about spooky season, because we're kind of entering October. It is this idea of this kind of old haunted theme park, and you just describe it so well. You really kind of took me
Thank
there.
you.
That scene where I don't know if I don't want to spoil things for readers, but that scene where they're taking off in the helicopter, they've already sort of think they've heard things and weird things have happened, and then that scene, and am I allowed to describe it, where the lights start going and you hear the music, and it honestly made all the hair stand up on my arms. So good.
Well, that's what's fun. And what I try to do is create something that is very evocative. And I push the limits, like with Bigfoot, the footprint that's found. And we never know for sure whether that was real or not, but it very well could have been. And
Mm.
footprint that's found at the crime scene. But anyway, with this, I thought, what can I do to make your hair stand on end? And it seems paranormal, but it's not, because there's a scientific explanation for everything. And I'm right now, as I'm working on my new book, I'm researching the whole notion of ghosts, because that's something that fills me full of wonder. And
Yeah.
I'm going to show you some ghosts eventually, and then I'm going to show you how scientifically you can make that happen. But that doesn't mean that all things paranormal are someone's scientific something. We don't, in other words, manufactured, because there are things we can't explain, and we've all experienced them. Who hasn't sat in a
Absolutely.
room and something weird happens, like something seems to throw something off the top of a dresser, especially in the UK and in old countries
Well,
where
it's
there are haunted
interesting.
places.
It's interesting you should say that, because I'm in my parents' house at the moment, which was built in 1668, I think. And there
Oh,
is apparently a ghostly presence here. Lots of people have talked about it in the past. And the other day I was here with my little son. He's 15 months old, and he looked up and smiled and waved at someone that wasn't there. It genuinely
oh.
it was
Well,
horrible.
you see, and a lot of people don't know that, we live in basically four dimensions. I mean, we can recognize, that's all that we can really recognize. But there are scientific theories that there may be many more dimensions. Um,
Mm.
I've heard numbers like 11 or 17. I mean, I don't know the truth of all this, but we we don't know that just because we can't see something doesn't mean
Yes,
it
yes.
isn't there. We can't see electromagnetic energy. You can't see the infrared beam on your remote control when you're changing your TV channel unless you put on special glasses. You won't see that, but it's there.
But
And
it's there.
so, and I tell people who have lost loved ones, I said, I know that they have been translated into something else. Their physical form has reached its expiration date, like
Mm.
like a can of peaches, you know what I mean? But who they are is a different matter, and they're not gone. And if they're in a different dimension, they might be sitting right next to you right now, and you don't know it. So,
That's very
so I like,
comforting.
so I like to explore things that cause all of us to wonder. And nowadays, nobody can look up at the night sky and see a strange light moving around that they don't recognize. You can't do that anymore without wondering what that is.
What that
And
is.
knowing it might not be an airplane,
Yeah.
it might not be a drone show. I mean, that might be a visitor from some other dimension, or could be another planet. And that, I just think that makes life so much more interesting if we just open our minds to things that we have been taught aren't real. Maybe they are.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, the freshness in your writing comes from as well. Well, but many things make it brilliant, but I'm in awe of your kind of use of kind of technology, really cutting edge technology. I'm particularly in awe because actually for the sort of books I write, I sometimes wish that mobile phones hadn't even been invented. Because they make things tricky, right? And DNA, that also makes things tricky.
Well,
Thinking,
listen, Lucy, I tell you a little secret. Your little friend here, if you want to beat any of those technologies in your book so that they don't get in the way of your plot, you just get hold of me and I'll tell you how to, I'll give you some tips, because it's just this, I mean, because of all the scientific people I deal with, I have to do reverse engineering and say, how in the world of cell phones and cameras everywhere can you
Mm,
write a story where it's not solved on page one?
sure.
So you have to figure out ways to beat the technologies. And I'll give you an example. In the United States, criminals are beating these technologies. For example, we've had a rash of gang burglaries where what they're doing is they're using signal jammers that they put outside properties, and it shuts down all the Wi-Fi. So you don't have, so if you're on in a smart house, and maybe yours
Yeah.
is because it's 17th century, if you're in a smart house, your phone's not going to work, your alarm system's not going to work, your cameras
Mm,
aren't going to work. You are back in the Stone Age. And they come
mm.
in, they take everything they want, and then they leave. And so there you that's a challenge for authors today. If you're going to set things in modern times, how do you keep the whodunit in there with all these technologies that are constantly spying on everything? Or DNA, how do you defeat that? But there are ways, and the bad
Oh
guys
well,
figure it out.
I'm
There are
gonna
ways.
be on to you on the emails. Um,
Anytime.
Thank you. But so how do you research all of that? And do you have a kind of Rolodex of experts that you call upon for all of that kind of that detail?
I actually do. I have consultants. When I'm doing research, like when I spent a lot of years some time ago, I quit Scarpetta in 2015 or 16, and did two space thrillers, which are probably the most unread books in the universe. And
No, my
and
historical books
they're so
definitely are.
they're so unread they wouldn't even bother to ban them. It wouldn't be a point. And so then I went back to Scarpetta, but during the course of doing all this NASA research, I met some amazing scientists that are different from the forensic people that I've met. So I have one his specialty is electromagnetic energy, like satellite stuff, cyber things, all what you and I were just talking about. How do you beat the cameras? And your phone is the biggest one,
Mm.
because I mean, we are all walking around with this thing, and it's just a little teeny computer and monitoring device that I don't care if you turn it off, that signal can be detected. And the only way that you can stop that is you have to put something around it. Like if you wrap it in aluminum foil, I shouldn't give the,
Ah, like a blocker, like for your car keys, you can do.
it's
Yeah.
it's basically you're creating what's called a Faraday cage, and it blocks all electronic transmissions.
Wow.
It'd be like if you walked into a steel vault and closed the door, you're not going to have a phone signal in there unless there's a
Oh.
router or something in there. So I know people where I can call them up and say, okay, let's talk about, all right, I want a ghost. How do I do that? How do I, or I have, so I do have people. I mean, it's just like when I did the Ripper case, a lot of people don't understand. I didn't do the science.
Mm.
I'm just the reporter. I didn't do the DNA testing. I didn't do the paper analysis. I didn't do the handwriting analysis. I didn't do any of that. That's not me. And when I write my books, I'm not a forensic pathologist. I mean, Dr. Marcella Fierro, who was my mentor when I worked in the morgue for 6 years, she's still the person I call when I have a question. She's in her 80s now. And so I go to the people who know. And for those who are writers or want to write, go ask people who know things you don't know. Don't write about what you know, write about what you learn. Because
Sure.
most of us, now I know you started out, and I know you're a very literary person, and you were an editor and all these things, but obviously with your books, your thrillers, and you go somewhere and learn something,
Yeah, and
don't you?
that's
I
part
mean,
of the fun, isn't it? That's the
yes.
excitement. Yeah.
What's the funnest research trip you've done on recent memory?
Oh my goodness. Well, I love going to interesting kind of wild settings and sort of basing things there. So I went to the mountains for the current book that I'm writing at the moment, and that was great fun. And some ice caves inside a glacier. Um,
Good.
I'm sort of imagining potentially a murder in there. I think it could be a very sort of spooky
And
environment.
by the way, icicles will work.
Oh, absolutely.
It will if it's sharp and strong enough, and you hit in the right place. That old Dick Tracy thing, it sounds like silliness. but you see, that is so good for you to do that, because I think it's very tempting these days to use Google Earth. And now I use Google Earth for directions. If I have Scarpetta driving somewhere, I mean,
That's good. Yeah.
I'm just gonna pull up a map and I'm gonna
Yeah.
look at it and I'm gonna, enlarge everything, because I can't go drive everything that she drives, and that's one thing. But don't do that in a city where you've never been, if possible, because like when you went into the mountains, I guarantee you saw things that you did not imagine.
Absolutely. I didn't even realize that the squirrels they have in the Alps are tiny and black. It's just like details like that. I feel like really small details that take the reader there, that kind of create that world for the reader. I think it's so important, that kind of boots
Well,
on the ground.
absolutely. Like when we drove, I was with two NASA scientists, consultants of mine, when we went to the Green Bank telescope, because I'm sure going to have NASA smart people with me. Um, and, and when we were driving there in through the mountains, and of course I can see the routes and everything on my, computer for help. But what you're not going to see is that there are log cabins still on the side of some of those roads, that it's so rural, that I was seeing a lot of Confederate flags, I'm ashamed to say, and log cabins are like, and I said, it's like suddenly you're back in the 1800s. Now you would never see that from just looking by Googling things. And so
Mm.
it's you got to go out and explore
It
something.
reminds me of one of the interviews I listened to with you, talked about when you worked at the morgue, going out and having a cigarette kind of in your scrubs. It was such a kind of evocative image. If you were just sort of writing about a morgue and you hadn't researched it, you hadn't been there, you hadn't talked to people, you would never have a kind of brilliant sort of image like that, I think. It's so
You never, I tell this to the TV people, the production people that I'm working with, with the Scarpetta TV, and I say, the morgue is not what you imagine, and it is absolutely not Grey's Anatomy OR. The morgue is not quiet. It's not a funeral home. It is like a noisy body shop. There's
sure.
water running, things are banging into each other. It's all metal. There's no acoustics. And it's a terrible din. In fact, you can hardly hear people talking. It's so loud. And some of the sounds, you know, are awful, because when they put the body on the steel table, it thuds. It's not
Right.
like, oh, are you comfortable? Here, let me move you and get your heated blanket. Oh no, that's not the hospital. And so it's harsh and jarring, and you would not believe that if you didn't go through it. And so my job is, you don't need to go there, but I'm going to show you what it is. But I can't know that unless I go there myself. And there's so many things that you just would never imagine if you don't show up. So you know what I say in life? Just show up.
Just
You
show.
never know what is looking for you at the same time you're looking for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It could take you off in interesting directions you didn't even know you were going on. Um, I mean, the other thing I think you're so good at showing us is the humanity at the sort of heart of the crime. And obviously, in this book, we see Scarpetta dealing with a victim that was an ex-lover, is still a friend. And you see that I thought you did that so well and so kind of tenderly. Just that moment where she has to kind of take a moment to process, doesn't she? She says, I focus on every detail of what I do, trying not to see who it is, trying not to think or feel or remember. And I think that's such a powerful bit of writing, as it's so concise, and yet we just absolutely feel and know what she's going through. How important is that to you, to kind of get to the kind of the real humanity, the sort of feelings at the heart of it, and also to get the language exactly right? How much do you kind of labor over that? It's kind of
Well,
like
thank you for
question.
asking such a good question, because that is a very good question. If you don't have humanity in it, I don't know why you're bothering. Because if it's just about giving somebody a good scare or a good few moments of diversion, but you're not doing anything at all constructive. Listen, you know more about literature, I bet, I'm sure, that than I do. I was a literature major too. I mean, I just say my English major simply qualified me to go look for something real to do.
Yeah,
It
oh,
did.
totally. Just read some
I mean,
nice
what are you
books.
supposed to do with that?
Yeah.
But you learn early on in literature studies, people
Mm.
don't want, they don't want to read a life lesson. So, but if you have sensibilities that you think are important to share, you have to find a way to do that or why am I doing this? And that was my big dilemma. When I couldn't get published in the early days, I wasn't a girl wonder like you. It took me a long time of slaving away. Gosh, there's so many words you can't say anymore, but um, that might be a good one to cut. But back in the early days when I was working so hard to get published, and I would write a book a year while I was working at the morgue, people need to remember I went there to do research. I never intended to work there, but then after 3 books getting rejected, I'd been there 4 years, and then I wrote Postmortem, and that finally got accepted. But by the time I left there, I'd been there full time for 6 years, um, and that and then I was at this dilemma when I was going to start Postmortem, because I thought, how do I write about what I'm seeing without exploiting it and losing the humanity? I mean, these are not murder mysteries on the table. This is someone's mother or daughter or child, or I mean, or somebody you knew, or it could have been you because you're projecting yourself onto that person because they were just like you, minding their own business when a psychopath decided to break in and hide in their closet until they got home. And so I thought, how am I going to do that? And the only way I could figure to do it was to do it to create the Scarpetta character, who was inspired by my female medical examiner friend, who was just an amazing forensic pathologist. And you have to have her humanity. You have to have her outrage. You have to have that she's kind to people in real life, because if she sees all this at work and then goes home and is an a-hole, then what's that about? How good you're just as bad as the people who are doing all this. You can't become like the thing you hate. You've got to take that high road. And so this gives me the opportunity to explore so many different emotional things that are grist for our mill as authors.
Absolutely. Fascinating answer. And I read somewhere that you feel as though you almost created Scarpetta as a kind of savior of your childhood self. I found that really sort of moving to read that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I mean, twice when I was a kid, my mother, when she'd moved us to North Carolina, the very area that this hurricane has destroyed, the Hurricane Helen, by the way, my town, I think, is just totally washed away. But when my mom moved us there when I was 7, 2 years later, she had a massive breakdown, and we had to go into foster care. And it was an emotionally abusive situation. And I used to fantasize that some neighbor, some kind neighbor, would come knocking on the door and take me away, because I wasn't allowed to talk about what went on in that house. I was told, I was threatened. You say anything. Don't you dare say anything that goes on here. When you go to school and all the rest, you keep your mouth shut. And so I used to have that fantasy. And I remember being a little, and then also even when I was home, because my mother was not real capable of doing my mother was very challenged with psychiatric issues. She was very, very smart, very creative, very beautiful person, but she had tremendous psychiatric challenges, massive depressive, paranoid episodes. And I remember one day being home from school because I had a cold or the flu, and I was alone on the sofa in the living room. And I remember I would fantasize that Ruth Graham, that was Mrs. Billy Graham, who lived up the mountain. She was this beautiful, just amazing person. My first book was her biography. And I used to fantasize that she would come down and take care of me. And so Scarpetta is that person who would knock on the door. Imagine her with Lucy and say, she's coming with me. Oh, no, she's not. Oh, yes, she is. Oh, yes, she is. Don't even try. Boom. I think every child wants a superhero like that. Somebody's going to take you away when something bad is going on. And Scarpetta, if the worst happens, that's who you want to see, because she can't necessarily fix it, but she'll make it better. And she will get to the bottom of things. And that's who you want showing up at your door. And so that is part of the alchemy of that character that kind of turns her into something golden for people, because she's your fantasy of when you need to call the fixer, baby. That's who you want.
Oh, I mean, oh my goodness, what a partnership as well. Scarpetta and Lucy. I think everyone needs them to save them, you know, move over Marvel.
It's kind of true.
Yeah, just so kick-ass. And I love Lucy with her helicopter and feel so proud to share the name with her. And her glasses in this book, they're amazing. Do you own a pair of glasses like that?
No, I don't have the kind of artificially intelligent, linked Google type glasses that Lucy
Google
has.
Glass.
But by the way, these are all real technologies that, and even as I write about some of these things, which are a little futuristic, but by the time, the book comes out, they're so much more real than they were. But we have, they're called computer assisted, devices that we are using as jewelry, glasses. We have smart fabrics that have sensors and woven into them. It's incredible what is going on technology wise. And again, it goes back to what you and I talked about earlier. While all of that creates interest, it also creates hardships for authors. Because, for example, Scarpetta now is in a position that by the time she gets to a crime scene, she's already seen quite a lot because she has videos downloaded to her. Lucy's glasses are doing background checks on somebody, even as she's sitting in that chair listening to something. Because AI is her AI assisted devices. And so so when you've got information landing at the speed of light, how do you then create suspense and unanswered questions? Well, you just have to understand what's out there. Then you figure out a way to use it to your advantage.
Sure.
And by the way, sometimes that instant information can lead you in a rabbit hole. But that's the world we live in. And unless we're going to set everything decades earlier forever, we have to figure that out. How we make it tell a better story instead of giving us more tools in our artist toolbox instead of fewer.
Yeah, embrace them rather than sort of hiding from them, pretending
Walk
they
into
don't
it.
exist. Yeah,
it's like the Scottish fairy tale writer George MacDonald writes, walk into the shadow, walk into that thing that makes you insecure or a little frightened, unless it's dangerous to you personally, then don't do that. But with your creativity, walk into the thing you fear and make it your friend if you can.
Sure. But it's interesting because you're talking about, the way kind of technology can both kind of help and hinder and just kind of outside influences in general. And you see there's a wonderful scene where Scarpetta it's not technology, it's another person who's trying to influence her. Is that, or not trying to influence her, it's the governor on the phone, and you see her put the phone down because she has to keep her instincts kind of sharp and not be blunted by anything or not be swayed by anything. I think that's such an impressive kind of example of her sort of professionalism, her kind of powerful professionalism at the heart of it all.
Well, the funny thing is, I didn't even know she was going to do that. I'm minding my own
Really?
business, typing away, and the phone rings, and Scarpetta answers, and of course, it's the governor who starts asking questions that she should not be asking at this stage of things. Very invasive, but the governor appointed her, so feels she can. It's a female governor, and I go, holy smoke, Scarpetta just hung up on the governor. Click. And she goes, oh, she'll just tell her later that she lost the cell signals. Oh, I'm in a bad area. Crackle, crackle, Yeah. And and actually, that's a very good device because you can always tell somebody. Now, nobody will trust me anymore if they lose their cell signal.
Yeah.
I just hung up on them. But yes, again, make technology work for you.
Yeah.
Work for you.
So we've talked about heroes. Can we talk a little bit about anti-heroes or villains? And I don't want to get too much into spoiler territory, but villains that may recur. Can you talk? Do you enjoy writing your villains?
I actually do. In fact, if I envy Thomas Harris being able to really delve sometimes deeply into that anti-hero, and because they're fascinating, and you wonder what was their childhood like and how did they get this way. And we've always been intrigued by monsters, but what you don't want to do is celebrate them. And that's where I draw the line. And when I wrote several Scarpettas from the third person point of view and I had to get in the mind of the killer, I started getting really uncomfortable with that. I really did. And I was glad to quit it. I don't want to do it anymore. And I'm afraid I might be too good at it. I don't want to be too good at that. which sounds weird, but I really don't. I'm afraid of what it
Totally
would
get
do to
that.
me. Like they say, when you dine with the devil, use a long spoon. And I
Mm,
like to keep my spoon really long when it comes to the violent psychopaths. I mean, I've sat down and talked to some of them on death row, and it's intriguing, but I felt an energy from these people, especially two of them that were really violent, horrible. One of them was a serial killer who's now gone, but I felt an energy, a dark energy from them that was palpable. I swear you could pick it up on a Geiger counter almost. And I thought, this is not something I want to be exposed to. When I was doing
mm,
the Jack the Ripper research, um, I felt the presence at times of a very dark energy, which is the entity of that evil that
yeah.
embodied that human being who did these things. And it's very disturbing. And while I'm going to show it, um, and it sometimes you have a monster that's so monstrous, you can't get rid of him.
Mm,
And when you're
mm.
and Carrie Grethen is one of them, and I'll say her name because she appeared way back in 1980, no 1994. I get my dates all mixed up now. Sometimes I say 1880 something. I go, no, almost, but
That'll be
not
the Jack the
quite.
Ripper.
And I just she first appeared in The Body Farm way back then, and the characters have such a history with this character. I mean, Lucy had a relationship with her. It was Lucy's
Mm,
supervisor at the FBI Academy, this techie person she met way back then. And she's one of those diabolical, soulless people, but absolutely intriguing because she's so damaged and so cunning and so brilliant and so fearless. She's like, well, she's really like an evil version of Lucy.
and
They're like twins.
charismatic as well, that charisma. You
Oh,
feel
and
that.
so, and yes, she came back. She reappeared in the last book. And that's not giving anything away because it doesn't tell you what happened. And then she's not done yet. And so we see eventually we begin to realize that in this new story. But she won't always be around. She has to go away sometimes. You can't keep having the same villain reappear like Darth Vader, as I'm sure you know. But but they're but when you have a good one, you got to have a villain. Without a villain, we don't have anything to oppose. The good guys got nothing to do.
Yeah, she's got that wonderful kind of Moriarty, Sherlock Moriarty. You've got that going on. I just love it. But it's so interesting as well. You say about that kind of palpable sense of evil, because of course, reading about your research into Jack the Ripper, I immediately kind of Google Walter Sickert, and his photo came up, and I got chills because he looks evil. I mean, poor man if he didn't do it, but there's
Listen, I know
there's a
people,
power.
so many people think that my Jack the Ripper theory is silly, but I'm telling you it isn't, and it's not about me. And it wasn't even my idea. It was Scotland
Mm,
Yard that put me onto him. I'd never heard of him before. And you have to wonder, why would an investigator at Scotland Yard not only put me onto that? And I said, well, why don't you guys do this? And he says, we can't investigate something like that actively anymore.
it's
And
so
he, and
cold. Yeah.
and then why would he meet with me to go over my notes and basically supervise what I'm doing, like I'm part of a murder team? That's crazy. So I didn't do it. I don't take the credit, because it is credit. I didn't solve that case. But I do believe Walter Sickert was this person. And you know what? It makes me very sad. I feel what he was a horrible person, even in real life, even in his non-murderous life.
Mm,
He was not a good person, very unkind and selfish, a psychopathic personality. But at the same time, he didn't come into this world saying, oh, I know what, I want to grow up to be a serial killer. No, he didn't. And he was so damaged. And
mm,
I feel sorry for anybody. I feel sorry for Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, but I don't, but I also hold them accountable. And what they did was hideous, and that cannot be forgotten, and it should never be repeated. And we need to understand better how humans can go so haywire, because it's an aberration. It's not a choice. It really isn't. It's a compulsion.
mm. Isn't that the kind of crazy thing about what we do as sort of as fiction writers, as crime writers? You come up against all of this stuff. You come up against the sort of highs and lows of humanity, of all. Yeah, it's just and you really take us there as a writer. So
Well, we take facts and we just weave them into drama. but
Mm,
but there's a lot of truth in it. It's like when you're writing your books and you're wondering, everybody's a suspect because they've shown up at something or they're living in the same building and they all have their secrets and their
mm,
stories. And while you're creating a fictional world, so to speak, you're not really, because what you're showing is reverberating the reverberations of humanity and what really goes on out there, the secrets that are behind walls, whether
mm.
it's a hovel where Walter Sickert has a bolt hole where he escapes to, like in Whitechapel after he's done something awful, and wouldn't we love to see what was in there, or
Mm.
whether it's a beautiful penthouse someplace where people are about as miserable and awful as you can imagine,
Yeah, no,
or maybe they're
absolutely.
not.
Yeah. Um, no, I mean, it's something I wrestle with quite a bit as a crime writer. And I wonder if you do too, the idea of sort of crime as entertainment and that sort of true crime, all of that, that kind of fascination with that does make me feel a little bit icky, even though I've been sort of captured by the true crime podcasts and investigations and things. It's a delicate line we tread, isn't it? I think.
It is a delicate line, but it's a okay line, and
Mm,
it's okay what we're doing. In fact, it's more than okay, depending on why we do it. Because, but you've got to remember, you can, if you can't. It's really hard to teach anybody anything if you don't make it enjoyable.
mm,
And if you want people to learn about science, if you want people to learn about human relationships, if you want people to learn a bit better about how to treat animals, whatever it may be, then tell them a romping good story
yeah.
to where you're not paying attention to what you're teaching them. I mean, people learn a lot about science from reading my books, but they don't know they're learning it. I still have people that come up to me even after all these years and will say, I've always locked my windows ever since reading Postmortem. Now, if I had given them a lecture, if they'd had me over for tea and I'd said, lock your windows, lock your windows, lock your windows, they wouldn't listen to me. But I told them a story and I didn't tell them to lock their windows. They decided that on their own because I was showing you what happens when you don't. And then
Yes.
they go, ooh, and it's like if you want to teach people to be really physically fit and to have our evolutionary process get us more agile and better, physically more talented. Like, look at today's gymnasts compared to what they used to do. They're doing magic tricks now, it seems like. Well, that is showing the improvement in human development, and that comes through sports, through
Mm.
games, through something that we're so entertaining ourselves that we don't realize how hard we're working and sweating and how much we're hurting later. So we are doing something, and we're enlightening people about things without them knowing we're doing it. And the good news for them is all the while they're enjoying your book, subconsciously, they're taking in data. They're getting smarter. They're learning more.
I love that. That makes me feel really, it's a really honorable profession, what we do. I think I'm going to take from that. And to be honest, it's something we've been doing as humans since the beginning of time, isn't it? Or since the beginning of our time is a way of teaching ourselves about the world and each other. That kind of
Well,
round.
let me give you a really poignant story that's true, that reminds you of why it's important to do what you're doing, what I'm doing, what journalists are doing, storytelling. Some years ago, one of my NASA friends was at the Paris Air Show, and he ran into Buzz Aldrin, one of the first people to walk on the moon with Neil Armstrong. And he ran into Buzz Aldrin, who, God bless him, is still alive. And he and Buzz Aldrin had dinner and they were talking. And Buzz Aldrin, I think very recently had been on some Hollywood show. I don't know if it was Dancing with the Stars or whatever it was. And so my friend said to him, excuse me, he said, what are you doing in Hollywood? You're Buzz Aldrin. What are you doing in Hollywood? And he said, I need someone to tell my story. I need my story told. He said, if nobody tells my story, it's like it didn't happen. So this is someone who walked on the moon. And think about that. If no one tells the stories, it's like you were never here. So when we're telling stories, even though they might not be a biography or factual, you're telling somebody's story because they're relating to what you're saying and they feel less alone. They feel less pointless. And by the way, nobody should feel alone and nobody should feel pointless, and you're not. And so our stories, even if it's a killer, a bad person who might be, a lot of prisoners read my books, and I bet a lot of prisoners read yours. I have a big prison fan club, I found out when I visited one, and all these at a women's prison, and they all read my books. And I thought, if you really read them, you might not have been here. If you read them carefully enough, you go, don't do that. But but all joking aside, even for those people, they're relating to characters, and everybody deserves to have their story told.
Absolutely. And reading teaches us empathy. We walk in another person's shoes. We can live 1,000 lives. I think there's a wonderful quote by George R. R. Martin by reading. But what a wonderful note to end on. I've just realized we've gone to an hour, and I've got hundreds more questions that I could ask you. But it has just been such an honor and incredibly inspiring. And so good to meet you.
I've loved it. You've been such a pleasure to talk to. I'll talk to you anytime.
Thank you so much. Thank you for talking to me, and
Thank
thank
you.
you to Fane for this production, for allowing us to do this, and thank you to our audience for watching this online Fane production. Bye everyone.